وہ پھر سے کٹ گئے ہیں. توصیف صاحب وہ کٹ گئے ہیں.
اچھا جی حضور. تو الحمدللہ ہمارے ساتھ ہیں مشہور و معروف اسلامک اسکالر پروفیسر ڈاکٹر منظور احمد بٹ صاحب، شعبہ اسلامیات کشمیر یونیورسٹی کے سربراہ ہیں. تو میں ان سے ادباً گزارش کرنا چاہتا ہوں کہ وہ اپنا مقالہ پیش کریں.
نحمده ونصلي على رسول الكريم. اعوذ باللہ السمیع العلیم من الشیطان الرجیم. بسم اللہ الرحمن الرحیم. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على ابراہیم وعلى آل ابراہیم انك حمید مجید. اللهم بارک على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما بارکت على ابراہیم وعلى آل ابراہیم انك حمید مجید. السلام علیکم ورحمۃ اللہ وبرکاتہ.
وعلیکم السلام.
So basically, so far as today's this webinar is concerned, so it is on the Islamophobia and how we can cope up with the situation. We know that in the world, all over the world, all over the globe, this time there is a this Islamophobia going on in one form or the another form. Now, so far as my understanding is concerned, that there are many reasons responsible for it. There are some reasons which are within our own society, within the Muslim society, and there are reasons which are beyond our control, which we cannot control. But and another one of the important things which I personally understand that has led to the Islamophobia, one of the causes. So that is basically there is a misconception about the Islam, that there is no regard for the human rights in Islam. This is one of the main and fundamental reasons which has led to the Islamophobia. There are many other reasons also, but this is one of the fundamental reasons, that this is a belief all over the world. The people who have developed this Islamophobia, who have developed hatred for the Islam, so they have this misconception that in Islam there is no scope for the human rights. So this is what I would be focusing my attention only on this aspect, that how Islam, in the Quran, in the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there is significant and there is tremendous provision so far as human rights are concerned, so far as the rights of human beings are concerned, so far as human fraternity is concerned. So what are different provisions? What are the different rights of the human beings which Islam recognizes? So therefore, so that we are able to somehow neutralize this misconception that there is no provision so far as human rights in Islam are concerned. So as I mentioned at the very outset, this is my understanding, that it is one of the major causes that people feel that Muslims are simply, they come and kill the people, kill other fellow human beings and all that. Probably they are being advocated like that in their religious scriptures and all that. So that is one of the main reasons. They say that these Muslims in the contemporary world, they don't have any regard for the human rights. Now we find that basically, so far as concept of the human rights is concerned, so it evolved finally, we find from the 1948 onwards in the world. But when we look at the Quran, when we look at the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or we look at the way how the Khulafai Rashidin, they governed their Islamic state, and what they made provisions for the other the people, other human beings who were not of their faith, who were not Muslims. So what how they provided them different types of facilities in the Islamic state. So we have very limited knowledge about that, and therefore I feel that we must first of all try to present the proper picture of Islam, that how Islam guarantees the rights of human beings all over the globe. Now, for example, if you refer to the Quran, chapter number 17, verse number 70, it is mentioned over there, I quote it in the English: "We have honored the sons of Adam, provided them with transport on land and sea, given them for sustenance things good and pure, and conferred on them social favors above a great part of our creation." So you see that the so far as the address in this verse of the Quran is concerned, so Quran is addressing the whole humanity. The Quran is not addressing only that we have honored only the Muslims, but Quran says we have honored the sons of Adam alayhi salam. So we are all sons of Adam alayhi salam. Whether we are Muslims, whether we are Christians, whether we are Jews, whether we are Sikhs, whether we are Zoroastrian, whether we are Hindus, whether we are Buddhists, or we belong to any faith. So basically, our origin is the same. That is what the Quran basically invites our attention toward this fact that you are the progeny of the Adam alayhi salam. You are all the progeny of Adam alayhi salam. Okay, you may be professing different religious faiths this time, but our origin is the same, and Allah guarantees that we have honored the sons of Adam. So no discrimination so far as honor for the human life is concerned. So Islam, the Quran does not make any discrimination between a Muslim and a non-Muslim. So Quran addresses the sons of Adam as a whole, that they have been honored by Allah. So therefore, Quran does not make any kind of discrimination. Now, if some Muslim makes that discrimination, so that is his cup of tea. But when we look at the basic sources of Islam, we look at the Quran, so we find there is no such discrimination being made in the Quran. So therefore, there is a misconception, as I mentioned earlier, that probably Islam does not provide adequately so far as the human rights are concerned. But we find that there is enough provision in the so far as Quran is concerned, so far as Sunnah Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is concerned for human rights. Now, for example, we find that so far as Universal Declaration of Human Rights is concerned, there is one article, it is article number 3. So it provides that everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of person, quote unquote. This is the in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, article number 3. So we find that Islam has shown a great concern for life, legally and practically. Basically, we find that Islam has forbidden of taking the life of any person, even taking life of one's own life. Now, for example, we find that so therefore we find that Islam basically warns us that no one should take the life of another fellow human being without a just cause. Now, if you refer to Quran, chapter number 4, verse number 29, it is mentioned over there, and kill not yourselves. Now, refer to chapter number 2, verse number 195, it is mentioned there, and do not cast your hand in vain. Now, move to the chapter number 6, verse number 195. It is provided there, slay not the life which Allah has made sacred. That is a human life. So where is the provision that you can go and you can kill other human beings? Basically, Islam prohibits from that. The case is something reverse. So basically, it is our misconception this time. Now, similarly, so far as the first verse, that is, and kill not yourselves, that basically points to the suicide. Now, see, there is a hadith in the Bukhari. I would just present the gist of that hadith in English. Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is reported to have said, "Whoever purposely throws himself from a mountain and kills himself will be in the hellfire. And whoever drinks poison and kills himself with it, he will be carrying his poison in his hand and drinking it in hellfire." So this is one way that is Islam prohibits, and these were the ways and means of committing suicide during the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And Prophet Muhammad, by inference, we can say all forms of suicide are prohibited in Islam. Now, similarly, we find that the second and the third verse which I quoted here, that is chapter number 2, verse number 195, and chapter number 6 of the Quran and verse number 195. So we find that basically these two verses serve as a deterrent for this crime of killing any person unjustly without the proper legal procedure. So that is being prohibited and that is being discouraged in Islam. Similarly, we find that in many civilizations, if we talk of the Babylonian civilization, we talk of the Greek civilization, we talk of the Roman civilization, you find that a woman's life could be taken freely by the head of the unit without any just cause. So even we find that before the declaration of Nubuwwah, prophethood by Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and we find what was the situation of the women in the Arabia. the women, children, the women, adults. So what was their position in Arabia? Everybody knows it. So we find that basically Islam elevated the status of the woman. This is another aspect, another dimension, that people feel that Islam does not give due honor to the women folk. So the case is something reverse. We find basically the Islam elevated the status of the woman. Now see one of the very heinous crimes that was being committed by the people of Jahiliyyah Arabia. So they would bury their daughters, babies, female babies, they would bury them alive. Now see how Quran is addressing to this issue. وَإِذَا الْمَعُودَةُ سُئِلَتْ بِأَيِّ ذَنْبٍ قُتِلَتْ. Now see, here see the situation that a person who commits such kind of heinous crime, Allah will not address him directly on the day of judgment. He will ask the victim that what was your fault, why you were being killed. So see the gravity of the sin which Islam accords to this, that is killing of the babies or degrading the status of the woman. So basically Islam elevated the status of the woman, particularly when we find that after the declaration, after the proclamation of prophethood by Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the position, the status of the woman was being elevated. Similarly, Islam prohibits in the Quran categorically that kill not your children for fear of want. We shall provide sustenance for them as well as for you. Where the killing of them is a great sin. You can refer to chapter number 17, verse number 31, where this provision is made. That don't kill your children because you feel that you will not be able to go for their maintenance, their sustenance, that will be a burden for you. So Islam prohibits from that. Similarly, we find that you cannot find that provision in this Charter of Human Rights. Basically, so far as the security of life is concerned, right to life is concerned. Now, if you refer to Surah Ma'idah in the Holy Quran, which is chapter number 5 of the Holy Quran, verse number 32. So we find there that it is mentioned over there, I just read the translation of that verse, that if anyone slay a person, unless it be for murder or for spreading mischief in the land, it would be as if he slayed the whole people. And if anyone saved a life, it would be as if he saved the life of the whole people. Then, although there came to them our apostle with clear signs and all that. So that is, if a person kills a human being, if he kills an innocent human being, he is not killing only one human being. So he is basically, it is being compared with killing of the whole humanity. Similarly, if a person saves one human being, one individual from killing, so he is saving the whole humanity. And there is no discrimination made in the Quran that the human being has definitely to be a Muslim. He can be Muslim, he can be non-Muslim. Human being. It is not that Muslim only. It is human being professing any faith, whatever the faith he professes. So Islam compares the killing of an individual human being with the killing of the whole humanity. And if you safeguard one single human being, that means it is compared with that as if you have safeguarded the whole humanity. This kind of provision you don't have in the Charter of Human Rights so far as security of life is concerned, so far as regard for the human life is concerned. So similarly, we find that no doubt the Quran has taken cognizance of the error, but yet the gravity of such a sin and the preservation of human life, that has been accorded provision in the Quran, in the ahadith of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Similarly, if we just refer to the Charter of Human Rights, we find that there in Article 1, it is mentioned over there, I quote it first, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in the spirit of brotherhood. This is provided in the Article 1 of United Nations Declaration on Human Rights. Now we find that Islam has also laid the best example of human dignity. Now, in enforcing it, Islam does not differentiate between a Muslim and a non-Muslim, or man and a woman, or dead or alive. Now see, so Islam is stressing the importance of the human life, human dignity, emphasizes the respect for all people, regardless of their beliefs or social status. Now, I quote here a gist of a hadith. Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is reported to have said, the hadith is in Sahih Bukhari, anyone who believes in the day of judgment should respect his neighbor. So far as dignity of a human being is concerned, he can be our neighbor. And in the hadith, there is no discrimination made that he should be a Muslim neighbor or a non-Muslim neighbor. Neighbor is neighbor. Whether he is Muslim, whether he is non-Muslim, to whatever faith, to whatever color, to whatever caste, to whatever race he belongs, to whatever nationality he belongs. So he is your neighbor. And Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam has ordained all the Muslims that anyone who believes in the day of judgment should respect his neighbor, that you have to accord, you have to regard, you have to accord the respect to the dignity of the person who is your neighbor, irrespective of the fact whether he is a Muslim or he is a non-Muslim. Similarly, there is another hadith, a gist of the hadith in the Sahih Bukhari, in which Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is reported to have said, he who believes in Allah at the day of judgment should show hospitality to his guest, and no discrimination is made, whether the guest is a believer or he is a non-believer, to whatever caste, to whatever color, to whatever race, to whatever nationality he belongs. So guest is your guest. And Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said, he who believes in Allah and the day of judgment should show hospitality to his guest. Now, similarly, we find that there are different, even when there were some sort of guzwat and all that, so there were clear directions given how this good treatment should be accorded to the prisoners of war even. So there are provisions for that in the number of ahadith were there. Now, I was telling you that even the Islam accords the respect to the dead, not only the living human beings, but even if there is a human being is a dead. I am referring here to one of the incidents is that at one occasion, a funeral was passing, a procession was passing, carrying a dead body. Now, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself stood up, and the Sahaba, the companions who were with Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they said, "Sir, he is not a Muslim. It is the procession of a Jew." Then Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Is he not a human being? Is he not a human soul?" And Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself stood up in the honor of the dead body of a Jew. So he was not a Muslim, but Islam accords even respect to the dignity. Even the dead bodies have the dignity. Islam accords respect for that. You can't have any better example of according respect to the dead body to a funeral procession than this which was accorded by Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and which he ordained his companions, his Sahaba, Rizwanullahi ta'ala alaihim ajma'in. Similarly, we find that in many civilizations, a woman was treated subhuman being. She was treated as a subordinate human being, and even some civilizations, she was treated as an eternal mischief. She was given different titles, and sometimes she was being called as a domestic receipt, and many other such titles were given to the derogatory titles were given to the women before Islam. So we find that before the particularly I am referring here to before the proclamation of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now Islam came and Islam elevated the status of the women. Now we find that in chapter number 4, verse number 1. So chapter number 4, verse number 1 in the Holy Quran, it is mentioned over there. I provide the English translation of the verse. "O mankind, be careful of your duty to your Lord, who created you from a single being and created his mate of same source, and spread them, these two, many men and women, through them many men and women." So here Quran is referring to Adam alayhi salam and Hazrat Hawa alayhi salam. We are the progeny of Adam alayhi salam and we are the progeny of Hazrat Hawa alayhi salam. So here we find that a woman is being treated at par with the man. She is the mate of the man, not subordinate human being, not something which is having status less than a male person in this verse of the Quran. So we find that Islam, basically the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam restored the honor to the woman, and Islam goes further to protect the dignity, the honor of the woman. This is one of the charges which I say that so far Islamophobia is concerned, that some people have misconception that Islam does not accord the due status to the woman. I mean, in that context, I am speaking over here. Now, for example, when we refer to the Quran, chapter number 4, verse number 25, it is provided there wed them by the permission of their owners, and give them their portion in kindness. This is about those women who were slaves. Similarly, in the same chapter, in verse number 24, there is a provision. So seek them with your wealth in honesty, wedlock, and not debauchery. Move to the chapter number 2, verse number 187. They are relevant for you and you are relevant for them. Libas. The woman is being compared with the libas. That she is your libas. She is a libas of her husband. And her husband is libas for her. So this intimate relationship and this dignity is accorded to the woman by Islam. They are relevant for you and you are relevant for them. So have then other provisions are being made over there. And Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said in the hadith, which is in many of the books of hadith, that marriage is my tradition, sunnah. It is my tradition, and whoever desires not my tradition is not my follower. So therefore, we find that there is the Islam accords due respect, due status, due dignity to the women folk. It is one of the misunderstanding among those people who have not studied Quran, who have not studied the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, who have not studied the Sunnah of Khulafai Rashidin. So they have misconception that Islam has come to degrade the status of the woman. Basically, Islam has come to upgrade, elevate the status of the women folk, whether they are daughters, whether they are mothers, whether the woman happens to be the wife of a person or she happens to be the sister of a person. So Islam accords her status, elevates her status as compared, and more status than is provided in the Charter of Human Rights. So similarly, we find that in the verse number 21 of chapter 30 in the Quran, it is provided that he created for you mates from among yourselves, that you may find tranquility in them, and has put love and mercy between you. So again, we find that how the status of a woman is being elevated by the Islam, by the Quran. So similarly, we find that there are other provisions in the Charter of Human Rights, and when we try to compare and understand those provisions in the light of the Quran, in the light of the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and I find that there are much more better provisions in Islam, even more than that what is provided in the Charter of Human Rights. Now we have the we find that many examples in the Sunnah of the Khulafai Rashidin, that how they accorded the this status, dignity to the women folk. Now, so far as another notion, misconception about the these rights of women in Islam is that probably they are not provided the opportunity to express themselves. Now, at one occasion, there's a very important and very famous incident that Hazrat Umar Radhiyallahu Ta'ala anhu, when he was delivering and when he was delivering a sermon, and he wanted to fix the this quantum for the mahar, and a woman stood up, and woman told him no. When Prophet did not fix any kind of limit so far as mahar is concerned, so far as dower is concerned, mahar is concerned, how can you fix? Hazrat Umar Radhiyallahu Ta'ala, who was the Khalifa at that time, he said that Umar stood corrected this time, and a woman corrected Hazrat Umar Radhiyallahu Ta'ala, and he admitted, yes. So therefore we find that Islam, so far as this misconception about Islam is concerned, so we find that Islam is elevating the status of woman. Islam is according the due dignity to the woman, and Islam accords the gives the full this provision for the woman that they can express themselves, and even a woman could differ with the opinion of the Amir al-Mu'minin. What else can you have? The best example there is that a woman, an ordinary woman, she had a difference of opinion with the Amir al-Mu'minin, and she made it public. And Amir al-Mu'minin was ready to accept it and admitted that yes, he was wrong, and this woman corrected me this time. So therefore, similarly, we have there's another this misconception about the Islam, that there is no right to fair hearing in the Islam. Now we find that this, so far as the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights is concerned, it is mentioned over there. Everyone is entitled in full equality to a fair and public hearing by an independent and impartial tribunal in the determination of his rights and obligations and of any criminal charges against him. This is what is provided in the international law. So let us try to have some idea about it. in the light of the Quranic verses. The glorious Quran refers to this. In these words, I refer to chapter number 49 of the Quran, verse number 6. O you who believe, when a wicked person comes to you with any news, verify it lest you harm people ignorantly. Similarly, in the another verse of the same chapter, chapter number 49, verse number 9, it is provided, if two parties among the believers fall into a quarrel, make peace between them, then make peace between them with justice and be fair, for Allah loves those who are fair. Similarly, when we refer to chapter number 4, verse number 59 of the Quran, it is mentioned over there, Allah commands you to return the trust to those whom they are due. And when you judge between people, that you judge with justice. So it is not that when you judge between believers, it is judged between people. Whether these are believers, whether they are non-believers, or whether there is a dispute between a believer and a non-believer, so you do justice. You have to do the justice. You are duty bound. Any Muslim is duty bound to do the justice. Irrespective of the fact whether the two parties are believers or one party is a party of believers, another group is that of non-believers, but Islam asks us, Islam ordains that, Quran ordains that you have to do the justice. You have to maintain the requirements of the adl and requirements of the law. So therefore, Islam guarantees this free trial. Anybody has a opportunity that Islam provides, that he has a right to be heard, and nobody should be given any kind of decree or any kind of fatwa should not be issued against anybody without being heard. He should be given opportunity to be heard, and then accordingly through the legal procedure, so the decision can be taken. Similarly, we find that so far as right to privacy is concerned, this is another thing that about which there is misconception about our non-Muslim brethren, that probably there is no provision for the right to privacy so far as the Islam is concerned. So we find that there is right to privacy mentioned in the international humanitarian law. It is mentioned there that no one shall be subjected to arbitrary interference with his privacy, family, home or correspondence, nor to attack upon his protection of law against such interference or attacks. So it is provided in the international law, in the Charter of Human Rights, it is provided over there so far as right to privacy is concerned. So we find that in an Islamic state also, or in a Muslim society also, so the way every person has chosen to conduct his private life, as long as he does not flout the law, is his own concern. Nobody can interfere. The Khalifa cannot interfere. The head of the state cannot interfere even in an Islamic state. So he has been guaranteed the right to privacy. So according to this, in conformity with the declaration here, which I have quoted over here. Now see, the Quran provides better provision for the right to privacy. For example, O you who believe, spy not each other or nor speak ill of each other behind their backs. Would anyone of you like to eat the flesh of his brother, dead brother? So that is, we are even prohibited from backbiting. That is, backbiting is basically violation of the right to privacy. So you cannot go for backbiting, and this backbiting has been compared with eating the flesh of somebody's dead brother. So nobody would like to have the flesh of his dead brother. So this Islam goes to that extent. So far as right to privacy is concerned, that even you cannot go for backbiting. That is a sin in Islam, and very heinous sin. Similarly, we find that there is a hadith in Sahih Muslim which is provided over there. Avoid suspicion, for it is the greatest lie, and be not inquisitive about one another, and not spy against each other. And in this Sunan al-Tirmizi, it is provided there is a hadith. One of the excellence of man's religion is in his living that which does not concern him. Whatever a person is doing, if it does not concern you, you should not be bothered about that. Why are you getting bothered about other people? What they are doing and what they are not doing. You should not get bothered about these people. So similarly, we find that in the Quran, again, I am referring to the right to privacy. So it is mentioned in the chapter number 24, verse number 27 and verse number 28. O you who believe, enter no houses other than your own houses without permission, and greeting the occupants. And if you find no one therein, still do not enter until permission is given to you. And if you are asked to go back, go back. This is provision of right to privacy in the Quran. If you refer to chapter number 24, that is, we are being asked that you don't have any right to enter somebody's house without seeking proper permission. You seek first proper permission, and even if the people who are there, they tell you, you go back, you have to go back. You cannot forcibly enter anybody's house, because that is you have to honor the right to privacy. So similarly, we find that even in chapter number 2, verse number 189, it is provided here. It is not righteousness that we enter houses through the back door, entrance thereof. Even we have been prohibited to make any kind of back door entry into somebody's house. The problem is with us that we don't put the commandments of Quran to practice. Now you find that we enter even the kitchen of some person, and then we tell them whether I am being permitted or not. You have already crossed all the barriers of privacy. You have crossed there. But Islam does not provide for that. Islam says, no, you seek first permission. So even if you are not granted permission, you cannot force somebody that I want to enter your house and you can enter because you want to enter. No, unless the permission is granted, you are prohibited. We are prohibited by the Quran. We are prohibited by the commandments of Allah that you should not forcibly enter into the house of anybody. So unless you are being granted proper permission for that. But unfortunately, we find that
اس کے بعد آپ کا ہم اس کا آپ تیار رہے انشاءاللہ.
Okay. Similarly, we find that there's again this misconceptions about the Muslims, that there is no freedom of thought, there is no freedom of conscience, there is no freedom of religion in Islam. This again a misconception which has led to the Islamophobia all over the world. That in Islam there is no provision for freedom of thought, there is no provision for freedom of conscience and religion. But when you look at the Quran, when you look at the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, I'll be just citing some references here, because I know that there is paucity of time and Tawsif Saf is trying to ask me to conclude. So Islam is a universal religion, and we find that, you see, the provision is made in the Quran regarding this freedom of thought, conscience and religion, which is one of the rights in the Charter of Human Rights. If you refer to chapter number 88 of the Quran, verse number 21 and 22, I quote it here. Therefore you give admonition, for you are to only admonish. You are not to force the religion on them. Similarly, refer to this chapter number 10 of the Quran. Could you compel men against their wish to believe? Similarly, refer to chapter number 2, verse number 256. La ikraha fi din. There is no compulsion in the religion. You cannot force somebody that he should accept your religion. There is no compulsion in deen. La ikraha fi din kad tabayyana rushdun min al-ghayy. So your job is to say what is right, what is wrong, but you cannot compel somebody against his wish, and you cannot force your religion upon some other person. So we find that many of you can go through the Sirah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You can go through the Sirah of the Sahaba. You can Rizwanullahi ta'ala alayhim ajma'in. You can go through the Sirah of Khulafai Rashidin, and you can go through the whole Islamic history, the literature of Islamic history, and you can see that how many pacts were signed between the believers and non-believers, between the Muslims and polytheists or infidels, and how the Muslims, they accorded due regard for the practice which they had concluded with the non-Muslims throughout the history of Islam. So similarly, we find that when Quran reminds us that inna khalaqnal insana min nutfatin amshaj nabtalihi faj'alnahu samiyan basira inna hadaynahu sabila imma shakira wa imma kafura. So Allah reminds us that I created you from a mingled fluid, and then I gave you the senses. After that I have left the choice to you, whether you become the grateful slaves of Allah or you become the ungrateful slaves of Allah. Similarly, if you refer to Surah Shams, it is stated over there, فَأَلْهَمَهَا فَجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا. So therefore, there is no such compulsion in the Quran which people feel that probably there is no freedom of expression, there is no freedom of religion, there is no freedom of conscience. So it goes contrary to the commandments of the Quran accords. Not only the Quran, when you look at the Seerah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when you look at the Seerah of Khulafai Rashidin, Rizwanullahi ta'ala alayhim ajma'in, and you see that how this was not only stated in the Quran, how it was put to practice during the period of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, during the period of Khulafai Rashidin, and then succeeding generations. So therefore, we have enough, since there is paucity of time, I am just giving you some passing of references from the Quran and the Sunnah regarding this one of the important factors. So that is, so far as Islamophobia is concerned, and I feel when I interact with number of my non-Muslim brethren, I feel that they have some misconception about the Islam, and one of the misconceptions which I shared with you this time, that is they feel it that in Islam there is no provision for human rights. They don't accord the respect to the dignity of the woman, to the rights of the woman, to the honor of the woman. So these are some of the misconceptions, and they feel that Muslims are only in the world to kill other fellow human beings. So that is not the cause. We find that there is deterrence, and there is very significant deterrence in the Quran so far as a killing of any other human being, fellow human being is concerned. So, but the issue is that we should directly learn it from the sources, and the original sources are the Quran, original sources are the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It is unfortunately that some of our non-brethren Muslims, they go for secondary sources, which people write according to their own mindset, and they get a sort of misconception about the Islam. That is my take on this issue, that one of the important factors in the contemporary world today, I find, for Islamophobia is that there are non-Muslim brethren who have a misconception that Islam does not accord honor, dignity to the other fellow human beings. So that is not the real case. So this is a misconception. So the better way to overcome this misconception is to have directly to study, to have access to the Quran, to have access to the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and see that what are the provisions over there. And I am sure that if we follow this methodology, if we follow this way, so I am sure that we will be able, and our non-Muslim brethren and sisters, they will be able to remove many of the misconceptions from their minds about the Muslims, and that will naturally lead to the atmosphere of proper understanding, mutual understanding, communal harmony, and what we call as the promotion of the pluralistic outlook of the society, the promotion of the composite culture, for which there are sufficient provisions in the Islam, which are the original sources of Islam. But only the requirement is that we should have a direct access to these sources, and we should try sincerely and without any bias. We should study these sources, we should study the Quran, we should study the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That will help us to have proper understanding, and that will automatically help us to neutralize to some extent this Islamophobia that is spread all over the globe this time. So thank you very much. Jazakumullahu khair. Fi amanillah.
बहुत
Back to Tawshid Sahab.
जी हुजूर बेहद शुक्रिया प्रोफेसर डॉक्टर मंजूर अहमद भट्ट साहब, सरबरा शोबा इस्लामियात कश्मीर यूनिवर्सिटी। बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया डॉक्टर साहब।
Thank you sir, thank you, Jazakumullah.
थैंक यू सो मच सर, थैंक सो मच। हम दिल की अमी गहराइयों से अल्लामा एहसान इकबाल कादरी साहब का खुशामदीद करते हैं प्रोग्राम में। मोस्ट वेलकम हुजूर।
जज़ाकल्लाह, अल्हम्दुलिल्लाह।
थैंक्स सो मच सर। और इंशाल्लाह इसके बाद आलम इस्लाम के एक मशहूर शख्सियत मौके के असर प्रोफेसर अख्तर वाशिद साहब से हम गुजारिश करते हैं अदबन कि वो अपने ख्यालात का इजहार करें। प्रोफेसर अख्तर वाशिद साहब, प्रेसिडेंट जामिया यूनिवर्सिटी शोबा इस्लामियात और जोधपुर यूनिवर्सिटी के वाइस चांसलर हैं प्रोफेसर डॉक्टर अख्तर वाशिद साहब।
शुरू करता हूँ अल्लाह के नाम से जो रब्बुल आलमीन है, रहमानुर रहीम है, मालिक यौमुद्दीन है, हम जिसकी इबादत।
प्रोफेसर साहब आप हमारी आवाज सुन रहे हैं हुजूर?
जी, शुरू करता हूँ अल्लाह के नाम से
प्रोफेसर साहब आप अपना हेडफोन थोड़ा आगे ले जाइए, आपकी आवाज कम आ रही है।
नहीं, मेरे पास हेडफोन है ही नहीं, मैं तो उससे बात कर रहा हूँ और मैं आपकी आवाज मुझे पूरी तरह सुनाई दे रही है। शुरू करता हूँ अल्लाह के नाम से जो रब्बुल आलमीन है, रहमानुर रहीम है, मालिक यौमिद्दीन है, हम जिसकी इबादत करते हैं और जिससे मदद चाहते हैं। दुरूद सलाम उसके नबी बरहक सैयदुल मुरसलीन, खातिमुन नबीन, शफीउल मुज़नबीन, रहमतुल लिल आलमीन, गुंबद खिदरा के मकीन, जनाब अहमद मुश्तबा मोहम्मद मुस्तफ़ा सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम, उनकी आल और असहाब पर। काबिल सद एहतराम हाजरीन, नाजरीन और सामीन, अस्सलामु अलैकुम व रहमतुल्लाहि व बरकातहू। मैं इंतहाई शुक्रगुजार हूँ जनाब तौसीफ वानी साहब का कि जिन्होंने मुझे ये इज्जत बख्शी कि मैं आज के इस वेबिनार में आपके साथ शरीक हूँ और अपने ख्यालात का इजहार करूँ। उन्होंने अपनी मोहब्बत करम फरमाई कहिए कि इस वेबिनार की सदारत मेरे जिम्मे की। ये सदारत नहीं है, ये सआदत है, जिसके लिए मैं एक दफा फिर उनका शुक्रगुजार हूं। साहिबो, जहां तक सवाल है